Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast with me, Rory Lees-Oakes. And with me today is my colleague and friend in the counselling world, Mr. Ken Kelly. How are you doing, Ken?
Oh, not bad. Yourself, Rory?
Oh, very well. Very, very well.
It's great to be back here, and I'm just, can I say I'm surprised, Rory? I guess I can. I've got permission to say I'm surprised. Can you see how wide I'm opening my eyes? And I'll tell you what I'm surprised at. I'm surprised at how well the podcast has been received. It's just a big thank you to all of you listening out there. The last time I looked just on iTunes, we had 7 5-star reviews, and for a podcast which is a mere 2 weeks old, I just think that is it's all thanks to you, our listeners. Thank you very much, and we're glad that you find our ramblings useful.
Indeed, and I'm kind of hoping that people are going to be interested in this week's podcast, Ken, because we've got some really, really interesting stuff.
We have, and I know that you're going to be looking at configurations of self, Rory, in Theory with Rory, which I'm really looking forward to, because I know that you've got maybe an angle on that people might not expect to hear. So I'm looking forward to that. In skills today, I'm going to be looking at the top and tail of the skills, where we kind of have to put in that contracting before we go into our actual skills sessions. And I know in many learning institutions, you're evaluated on how you do that. So we'll be having a look at maybe some tips and ways that you can implement that into your skill session. And we're going to be kicking off today with something that's very dear to my heart, and that is, I guess, counselling in a diverse world that we live in at the moment, Rory.
Absolutely, and it's been a bit of a hot topic on our Facebook feed. So if you want to join our Facebook community, if you're just listening to the podcast for the first time, if you go to www.counsellingtutor.com, remember there's one L in counselling, it's the English spelling, not the American. And if you go to the top right-hand corner, there's a tab that says Facebook on the website. Click that, and you'll sign in. And then if you just ask to be added to the group, it's a closed group, but ask to be added, we'll let you in, and you can see and meet up with a whole host of people who are qualified. There's some tutors in there, lots of students on their learning journey. And one of the things that came up in a feed, which was kind of quite hotly debated, which is always a good thing, was equality and diversity, and who would we want to work with and who wouldn't we want to work with. And I thought I'd just kind of kick off, Ken, with just giving an overview of what the law is, certainly in the UK.
Yeah, and of course, when we're speaking about this, the way the world is now, and if you're in practice as a counsellor, it is likely that you're going to be working with a range of different people. So we're kind of looking at gender, sex, sexuality, ability, disability. I hate that word, disability. It's a word that is used in the UK. It's kind of the government's word, but I just don't like it. I think it's disempowering, just that word. But that's my own stuff. Class, age, religious beliefs, whether you're married, civil partnership. There's just so much that is encompassed. And are you going to share with us a little bit about what the legislation here in the UK says? Absolutely,
Ken. And you're absolutely right. Some of the wording is very difficult. But there are actually 9 protected characteristics. Up until 2010, there were different forms of laws. And in 2010, they were brought together under one umbrella act called the Equalities Act. And there are protected characteristics. The first is age.
Yep.
You can't kind of be prejudiced against anybody because of age. Disability, and there's that word again, Ken, that comes up. Gender reassignment, so for those people who are transitioning, maybe they're transitioning from male to female or female to male.
Yep.
Marriage and civil partnership. Pregnancy and maternity.
Yep.
Race, another word that really doesn't have a particular meaning. It was an invented word to categorize people, but they use it in here, race. I want to say not having a meaning, it's meaningful for a lot of people, but as actually a legal term, it's quite a difficult one. Religion and belief, sex, which is gender, sex, man or a woman, and sexual orientation. So if you're heterosexual or if you're gay or bisexual, again, the Equality Act covers that. And as therapists, we have to be aware of our own limitations. And I guess, Ken, we have to be aware of our own prejudices.
And that's the key here. It's about looking who you really are. Part of becoming a reflective practitioner, becoming a counselor, a therapist, is examining yourself and knowing who you are. And it's maybe that you will find parts of self that need to be questioned and need to be looked at. And I know certainly that was part of my journey, and I'll share. When I was born in the UK, when I was 7 years old, my parents immigrated to South Africa. And this was during the apartheid years when we immigrated. So I was a very young boy. And I went from a class at school, which was a mixed colour class here in the UK, to South Africa, where I was in a whites-only class. Only white children. There were signs in parks that said, only white people may use this park. Only white people may sit on this bench. And as a child of 6 years old, I don't think I was in a position to question that. It just was. And it was only when I got into my teens, when I guess my political awareness started kicking in, that I started looking around and going, hold on a second, what's actually happening? And it was at the time that South Africa was going through its own transition and its own changes. But I needed to really have a look at what that was for me, what those deep roots were, when looking to go and share journeys with people, to see what my own prejudices were, and to recognize them and question them.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And, you're not on your own. At 57 years old, I grew up with a map of the world on my wall as a child, with the sun never shines on the British Empire.
Yep.
Sun never sets on the British Empire. And I had this map of the world, and all the red areas were the British Empire. And my father, who was a very decent man, would point out that that's when we kind of ruled the world. And, I grew up as a working class lad with the chance of 2 World Wars and 1 World Cup. Not a very respectful turn of phrase to our European and certainly our German friends, but that was the culture, and I agree with you totally, Ken. It was an absolute eye opener, going through training and being confronted and saying, well, actually, what are your real thoughts and feelings about this? And the wonderful thing about training is it should be a space where people can actually explore that. I as a trainer myself, I hope I don't audit people and say you shouldn't be saying that. I'm really interested in where their views are coming from. And it's amazing how much of it is generated by the media, how much of it is generated by very negative media stereotypes. And once we've got past that, and I say, well, how many people do you know who are, and then put the underline in?
Yeah.
People go, well, I don't. And they say, well, that's the thing. You can look at the media and let the media tell you what to think, or, to use a counselling term, you can use your own internal locus of evaluation and trust, as Roger said, in your experience.
Oh, for sure. And it's tricky because there's also the tendency to politely tiptoe around equality and diversity, or almost fearful to tread because you don't want to say the wrong thing. And it's about being comfortable and having a good understanding, and also checking your own frame of reference. And I'll give you an example from my early placement days. I remember working with a client, and this is certainly not breaking confidentiality because it's a very vague story, but working with a client who was an Indian lady, and she shared that she was unhappy in her marriage, but she also shared that she was in an arranged marriage. And from my reference point, from who I was and what I understood from coming from a completely different culture, there was a part of me that was in my frame of reference feeling, I guess, sorry for her that she was in an arranged marriage, and she'd been put into an arranged marriage that was now an unhappy marriage for her. It turns out, when I listened to the client, that she was quite happy with the arranged marriage. That wasn't the issue at all. She was as happy as anything. That was exactly what she wanted, and it was what she wanted for her children as well. It just turned out to be a bad marriage. as many marriages turned out to be bad. It wasn't a bad marriage because it was an arranged marriage. And I fell into the trap of I guess, being in my frame of reference and thinking, because it is an arranged marriage, and going. So it's about being open to look at self and be led by your clients, taught by your clients. And I'm very grateful to that client for teaching me that.
Yes, absolutely, Ken. And it really is about, having an understanding. And one of the things that comes up year after year after year when we do this module is learners say to me, Rory, do I have to know about every single culture in the world? There must be millions of them. How do I do that? Well, the answer is you don't. The answer is you need to know about the client who sat in front of you, and you can do some research and kind of get some sense of difference. So maybe if I had a client who was, and I'm picking a stereotypical client out of the air, gay. If I didn't know anything about the kind of history of sexuality in this country, I might very well fall into a few into some traps. And one of the traps, and it comes up again and again and again, and I hear it so often, not in counselling circles, but in general conversations when I'm out and about. Well, they will have that problem because they are underline the difference, because they're disabled, because they're gay, because they're black, because they're Asian, because they're Muslim, because they're Jewish, Christian, name any one of them. And the fact of the matter is that is a massive stereotype. Just to say, well, of course they're going to be depressed. Why wouldn't you be if you were?
I'm sorry, this is it is a hot topic, and as we're debating this, I can definitely feel a movement of my emotions as you're saying that the inverted commas, those people, where a person with all the wonderful individualism that person has is characterized as being as a part of a group. They're people, they're individuals. When we look to the Equality Act here in the UK, it speaks about discrimination and harassment, and that's what the law is there for, and that's exactly what it is. It is discrimination, as seeing as people as different from, lower than, not the same as, and it is harassment. It is... the blood is boiling, Rory. You're going to have to take over now.
We're recording this on a Skype feed, and I can see Ken, and he's raving his arms about and getting very animated. Take a deep breath, Ken. Take a deep breath.
Yes.
Just better. Yeah, and the other thing is that when I was a support worker, and not as a counsellor, but when I worked as a support worker, I would hear colleagues occasionally say, I've got this client who is... ... yeah. And I don't know anything about it. So I got the client to tell me about it. Like the client speaks for every single person.
Yeah.
And, if you've got a client there coming about, so if, say, for instance, I was sat in front of a Martian, Ken, and I was talking about my troubles, and I said to the Martian, I've got troubles in my life, and the Martian said, what's it like to be an Earth? Tell me about being an Earthman. Tell me about what's it like living on planet Earth. Well, I could spend the whole session just discussing what it's like to be an Earth person, a human being, not talking at all about what I came for. And that is a bit of a danger if we let our clients educate us. Yes, they do by what they say, but if we're sitting there saying, well, tell me more about this, then the client's not really getting the service. We should be getting supervision. We should be getting our own knowledge around it, maybe doing some training, maybe doing some reading, maybe just kind of talking to other therapists and saying, do you know where I can get some information on this, or talk to people who know a bit more. The client isn't there to primarily educate us on their difference or whatever they bring. They're there to bring their problems to us, and we're there to kind of help them work them out.
And you're 100% right, Rory. And that Martian speaking to you, you are not a representative of Earthmen. You are a representative of Rory, so you can only give your frame of reference, and that's the same when working with a client. I think that's the point that you're making there. And we do have differing belief systems. We have to acknowledge that. That's part of that searching into self. We do have cultural heritages. We do have different languages, different ways that we grow up, maybe different religions. So it's about understanding who you are and then doing the CPD, the continuing professional development, to be able to understand your client and where they might be coming from. And if you do have a client with you and they are presenting with something you don't understand, not just culturally or regarding to what we're speaking about today, anything, go and learn about it. It's not for them to educate you, it's for you to educate yourself.
Absolutely. And some of it can be really subtle. I went to London before Christmas for a bit of a bash. I was on the telly and I got talking to a few people and somebody said to me, where are you from? I said, from Manchester. And he said, Manchester United or Manchester City? And I'm like, what are you on about? And he said, well, which football team do you support? And I said, well, I don't follow football. And they were like, really? You're from Manchester and you don't follow football? I'm like, yes, I am from Manchester, and no, I don't follow football.
Yeah.
And honestly, the surprise, and we're 150 miles apart, maybe? And it was like, and someone actually turned to someone else and said, he's from Manchester and he doesn't follow football. It's like, no, honestly. And hey, here's the thing, Ken. There's a lot of people in Manchester that don't follow football.
Yeah, and that is stereotyping, isn't it? It's kind of putting you in there and saying you're from a certain area. What, an Irishman who doesn't drink Guinness? It's just stereotyping. It's just, we could talk about this for a very long time. And here's the thing. I encourage you to take this topic, take it in with your peers and go and discuss it. Think about it yourself. Examine your own prejudices that you may hold. Examine how you grew up, your family grouping and environment, your culture, your heritage, who you are, and have a look at, do you hold any prejudices against other people? What's that about? Dare you talk about it with other people? Get it out there.
And the counselling group is the ideal place, supportive environment where people can be, challenged in a correct manner, and questions asked where people can say, actually, is my view of the world accurate? And I have a famous phrase that I always quote to my learners, and I can't do it. I can speak the Latin, but it is a bit tricky when I'm doing a podcast. But it's by Terence, who was a playwright. He lived 139 years before the birth of the person we know as Jesus Christ, and he said, "I am a human. Nothing human is alien to me," and I kind of like that. Terence, you can't beat Terence. He was a good lad, wrote a few plays, and what he was saying basically is all human beings, are human beings. And that's a fact. Sometimes we have different views, different opinions, but generally speaking, only human.
I like that. And it gives me a segue, a beautiful, smooth link into going into today's topic, which is a theory with Rory. And today, Rory, you're going to be speaking about the different people inside of us, the different people in the one, the configurations of self.
Part of me is Ken. So couldn't resist that. Part of me is. I'm going to speak of a newer idea in person-centered therapy, one that's developed by Dave Means, who's just a well-known commentator on the world of person-centered therapy, called Configurations of Self, sometimes known as the many voices inside the one. And for those people who are doing essays on person-centered therapy, they're always asked for some of the newer ideas. So this is a newer idea. In fact, it's 2008, so you can't get kind of newer than that in terms of theory.
Counselling Theory with Rory Lees-Oakes.
Welcome to Counselling Theory with Rory, and today we're going to discuss a new idea in person-centered therapy called Configurations of Self, sometimes known as dialogical self. And the first thing I want to get across before I kind of start the podcast in general is that person-centered therapy is not a passive, stuck-in-time therapy. There are plenty of people around the world talking about its impact, about how it's developed. There are many tribes of the person-centered nation. In fact, that's a book. I'll put a link into the show notes. So if you go to www.counsellingtutor.com, there's 2 L's in counselling. It's not the American spelling. And if you go to this podcast episode, I'll put a link into a book called Tribes of the Person-Centered Nation. And you'll find that actually there's quite a few different forms of person-centered therapy. And in fact, Carl Rogers himself gifted the therapy to those people who develop it. He kind of, when he got into kind of his middle 80s, he said to people, including his daughter, Natalie Rogers, take it in a different direction, find your own way with it. And indeed, Natalie Rogers, who's sadly recently died, Rogers himself was quoted as saying about his daughter's work, it's ploughing a new field, it's going in a different direction. So the first thing to realise is that person-centered therapy is still a living, growing, debated therapy. The Kurlan civilization believed that an individual was a community of individuals. Inside us are many voices, each with its own desires, its own style, and its own view of the world. The many voices inside the one. Is this a quote from a book on psychotherapy or counselling? Well, not quite. These lines were spoken by actor Patrick Stewart, who played Jean-Luc Picard in an episode of Star Trek called The Chase. He was describing an alien civilization who believed that each individual was a community of thoughts, feelings and behaviours. He could have been describing this relatively new idea in person-centred theory, known as configurations of self or dialogical theory. The concept of configurations of self in person-centred counselling was developed by David Means and Brian Thorne. It describes a philosophy that we develop various alternative personalities or configurations of self that rise up within us in certain circumstances and result in thoughts, feelings and behaviours that may surprise us. The idea moves away from Rogers' original theory that we're an organismic whole, rather that we are a community of thoughts, feelings and behaviours that reside within us at any given time. As Captain Jean-Luc Picard so succinctly stated, the many voices inside the one. And I'll give you my take on it. When I was taught person-centred therapy, I was taught that we were a whole. So if you think of a circle, we existed within this emotional circle, which is called the organismic self. And for those of you who've studied transactional analysis, you'll know there's the parent, the adult and the child, and that we move up and down those ego states, where person-centred therapy sees us as a whole. You know, our friends in transactional analysis see us moving through three states. So there's a difference immediately. If we think of Rogers' idea of the circle and all of us existing, all our emotions existing within that circle, what dialogical theory or configurations of self tells us is within that circle there's lots of little circles, and each of those circles has its own name. Could be anger, could be fear, could be joy, could be shame, could be aggression, could be sadness. So, and all those little circles, they kind of rise up within us. Those emotions in those circles rise up within us. So instead of being just one organismic self, we're a whole, but we're divided into little parts. The many voices inside the one. A definition from Means and Thorne in 2000 says a configuration of self is a hypothetical construct denoting a coherent pattern of feelings, thoughts and preferred responses symbolised or pre-symbolised by the person as a reflective of a dimension of existence within self. I think a better way of describing that is think about your day. You get up in the morning, you might be very happy. So that's a happy configuration. You're on your way to work and somebody cuts up in front of you on the car. Maybe you're a cyclist and someone cuts up in front of you. You become angry. There's another configuration. You get to work and you think about something that may be sad in the past, and there's a sad configuration. And then finally you get your first cup of coffee of the day, or your first glass of water of the day, and all of a sudden you've got a happy configuration. So we move through a set of emotions and behaviours. And that is the behavioural responses. They're symbolised by how we feel and how we behave. So that's probably a more clearer, less wordy explanation. Many writers have made reference to Rogers' ideas around conditional positive regard, the idea that a client may limit their own self-acceptance because of fear, shame, regret, embarrassment, anger, or a sense of loss they have about themselves or maybe others. These negative emotions or constructs are sometimes referred to as not for growth configurations. The negative side of the personality, the emotional inner voices which bring psychological pain and hamper both happiness and self-understanding. By helping the client explore and examine these not for growth configurations in a safe and non-threatening or judgmental environment, it is possible for the client to process these feelings, thoughts and behaviours and begin to process of checking the reality and the impact on their lives. And I'll give you one example from practice. Through the years, I've worked with a lot of clients who've been survivors of abuse. And one of the recurring themes that sometimes clients bring with them who've experienced this is that at some level it's their fault, and it usually starts with if I hadn't done this, if I hadn't done that, if I'd only walked a different direction, if I hadn't gone out that night. And it's amazing how many clients can really beat themselves up about what they believe to be their own behaviour has led them to being abused. And of course, it's never the client's fault. If someone is a victim of abuse, they have been abused. It's not their fault. And sometimes working with that non-for-growth configuration and exploring it and examining it in the therapy room can be really useful as they kind of realise that it's not their fault. And that's quite a liberating place. In my experience, clients feel very cathartic, very liberated by knowing that. By helping the clients explore and examine these not-for-growth configurations, it's possible that if the therapeutic alliance is strong enough, and by that I refer to the client acknowledging the counsellor's non-judgmental approach and being willing to explore these ideas. So there's two things there. One is that the client actually believes and understands that the therapist, the counsellor, is there to help them, and has the courage to explore this kind of dark side of their personality, the stuff that's making their lives difficult. It's possible for the client to begin to offer themselves unconditional positive regard or accept those parts of themselves that may hamper emotional growth. So maybe part of it is to be accepting of those difficult sides of them. Maybe that they want to change a behaviour. Maybe they can work through that, and by talking about that behaviour can find a way of dealing with it. And also, it's kind of a place where maybe some people are just so ashamed of what they've done in the past that they carry it around like this big heavy bag, like a ball and chain maybe attached to their ankle. Just by kind of the therapist and the client looking at it, it may be that they can kind of relieve themselves of that weight and find a way forward. Now, it's important here that the role of the therapist is not to analyse the negative configuration, but to support and empathise with the clients so that they're able to explore and examine the configuration that's causing self-defeating behaviours, thoughts and feelings. The counsellor, by doing this, is able to strengthen the therapeutic bond between themselves and the client in an attempt to understand these feelings. This allows the client to explore parts of themselves they may have been reluctant to consider. And I mentioned this earlier. Some clients come with a heck of a lot of shame around their past or something they've done. And it's only when the client feels safe enough to explore it and that alone, that feeling around it, that maybe they can come to some resolution of it. It can be a scary process, both for the client and the counsellor, as they explore this new and sometimes unexplored emotional territory. The key aspect of this approach is honesty, and the counsellor needs to be aware of their reaction to the not-for-growth configuration in a case a process is triggered with them. And sometimes we get into transference and counter-transference. So if, say for instance, a therapist is working with someone who's done something around anger in the past, and the client becomes angry. So that's transference. In other words, the client's projecting that anger onto the counsellor. It may be the counter-transference is the counsellor then is reminded of a historic time when they were the victim or on the receiving end of anger, and they may become really passive or they may become quite aggressive. And I think the key here is that the therapist needs really, really to be emotionally robust and really understand what they're doing. And it is a great amount of emotional robustness because you're working with very, very powerful configurations, very powerful emotions or thoughts that may be going on for the client.
Well, I know, Rory, that this configuration of myself really enjoyed listening to what you were discussing there, and I really enjoyed the reference to Star Trek. I'm an avid Trekkie myself, with the old live long and prosper and all that kind of stuff, and it makes sense, and it's really interesting theory, so thank you for that.
Oh, well, thanks very much, Ken. And next up, of course, is Ken, the Skillsmeister, and he's going to be talking about beginning and ending sessions. He's going to be talking about those very important beginnings where clients come to you and you're opening the session, the opening of the theatre, I call it.
Counselling Skills with Ken Kelly.
Today I wanted to explore the topping and tailing of a simulated skill session. So this is particularly for while you're in the process of learning and your skill sessions need to be observed and they need to be evaluated. And certainly here in the UK, when you go into level 4, there is an advanced counselling skills written report that you need to do that kind of parallels a skills tape that you submit. And it's about listening to the tape and then kind of evaluating how your skills were used. But a lot of the points, a lot of the marks are given to how you start and how you end your skill session. And I know that from speaking to a lot of learners, this can often be a challenging area. What is it that needs to be said? How do you say it? And how do you put that top and tail in a way that is respectful to the client? So that's what we're looking at. So first of all, we're going to be marked on this. So this is really academic. We're looking at the academic side of this. I guess it's slightly different when you're out in practice in that you will be doing an opening or a contracting session with a client once, whereas here when we're doing the simulated skills sessions, it seems like we do it again and again and again. And we're doing quite a lengthy top to a counselling session just for a single session, and that single session maybe 20 to 30 minutes. So first of all, let's just have a look at what is it? Well, it's a working agreement. That's what the top of the session is, or the introduction. It's the working agreement. So it's the contracting of what's going to happen in this session and how it's going to happen. Why is that there? Well, it's there to empower the client. Now, I do have an example that we're going to be going into, and it's a 10-minute example of a top for a skill session. You might think, wow, 10 minutes. This was a 30-minute skill session. 10 minutes of this session was taken up by the top. So I'm not going to go too deeply into it now. I'm rather going to leave you with the actual simulated session that I have recorded for you. You're going to hear that I've taken all of the clients' replies out. So where they say, yes, anything where they show kind of where their voice appears, I've taken that out. So you just hear my voice because that's what's important for this focus here. So it's the agreement, it's the working agreement here. And what does that do? Well, it empowers the client. It gives them the choices within the counselling relationship. And if you want to look more deeply into contracting and what it's there for, just pop on over to session number 1 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast, where Rory and I actually really drilled down into contracting. So basically, we're going to be outlining what is on offer. We're going to be talking about the modality of counselling. I'm a person-centred counsellor. I'm going to be outlining what that is for the client. And all the way, I'm checking the understanding with the client. Do they get it? Do they know what it is that I'm sharing with them? I'm going to be looking at the limitations in confidentiality. And of course, these will vary depending on the country and the legislation that you work under. I'm also going to be looking at health and safety, basically just kind of covering over that. It's non-maleficence in the BACP ethical framework, and it's kind of to do no harm. So it needs to be an aspect of what we kind of look at as reflective practitioners. Of course, time boundaries, going in, letting the client know how long we have, and of course when you're coming out, so on the tail side of your session, you're going to be giving maybe a 5 minutes just to let the client have time to pack up and know that they're coming to the end of the material. It allows them to kind of just change gear and allows you as the practitioner to kind of close everything up before they leave. Maybe do a good summary of what has been brought to give them one neat package that they can go away with where they feel understood because the summary matches the material that they've brought. Maybe the summary is an opportunity for the client to say, no, it's not like that, it's like this, which is great for you as the counsellor because it allows you to kind of realign where you are and be fully within the client's frame of reference. If you would like a transcription copy of this introduction to a counselling session, I've gone ahead and made one up for you, and I've put together a little resource pack. In the resource pack is the transcription of what you're about to hear. It is also the audio file of what you're about to hear. So that's the complete introduction to the counselling session. And I've also taken a section from an assignment that was written referring to this recorded session. So if you would like to have that, you can get it straight away. It's free of charge. You just go to counsellingtutor.com, click on the podcast tab. We are episode 4. Click on episode 4 and you'll find that right there in the show notes. That is yours. You're free to take that. I just want to say I'm not putting this forward as how this should be done. I'm not putting this forward as a best case study, but it certainly is a case study that you can refer to maybe when you're doing your own assignment, linking skills to practice and having to evaluate your own skills. It might be useful for you. Just want to pop in right now that not everybody listening to this podcast is going to find this of use for them right now. It may be that you're not at this stage in your studies. It may well be that you're already in practice or that you're already in placement, so you've passed this over and it's no longer relevant to you. That's okay. Just click ahead in the podcast 10 minutes and you're going to pick up with Ask Ken and Rory, which is worth listening to today. So don't just leave the podcast. Click ahead those 10 minutes. But if this is where you find yourself in your studies, then I guess that resource pack will be of interest for you. And of course, here is that introduction to a counselling session.
And I guess we're here now, and this is the time that we have talked about on the phone to come together to spend a bit of time together, to spend 30 minutes together. And I think what's important for me is to call this as it is. And what this is it's a session that will be evaluated. So whatever you choose to bring today, the chances are that a moderator, an external moderator, may come in and may also ask for access to the audio file. And I think it's just respectful to you to put that out there right in the beginning. And that may or may not influence what material you choose to bring here today. I mean, I know you now, and I know your name, and you know my name is Ken. And I've taken the liberty of putting together a contract, a little counselling contract, specifically for this session, which I'd like to share with you, if that's okay. So that's a copy for yourself, and you're more than welcome to take that away and have a look through it if you like. And are you happy for me to just go over some of the points? And what I'm really interested in is how that feels for you, how the points feel for you. And it's, I guess we start off with what's on offer. And, well, what's on offer is only one session here today, but I think also to realise that if there was maybe something that came up for you in that one session that we have in this short period of time, and you felt that you might like to explore that deeper, then there might be the opportunity for me to refer you on to maybe the college counsellor. But this session, just to the one session, what I offer you is person-centred counselling. And I guess my understanding of person-centred counselling is that together we kind of walk through whatever you choose to bring, wherever you choose to lead. I will go with you and we'll go through it together. And it's about you finding the solutions. How does that feel for you? Health and safety, just to touch on it very basically, is that there are no planned fire drills that I'm aware of. So if there is a fire alarm, that would kind of indicate that there was maybe an emergency. And what I would suggest in that instance is that we go together and just follow me, and we'll go and we'll together find a safe place. And the session of counselling that we're offering here today is 30 minutes in length. And you can choose to bring whatever you feel that you'd like to bring to that, and we'll explore that in hopefully what I aim to give a safe environment. And I think it's important now to speak about confidentiality. We've already covered that this is a recording. And I guess we speak about ownership of that recording. Because of the nature of what it's being used for, I will need to retain that ownership. And that will be loaded onto the VLE as discussed. What I feel is important to bring in is that in the evaluation of the material in the recording, what's being looked at is how I am working with you, not so much maybe what you're bringing. I aim to practice ethically according to the British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy, that's the BACP Code of Ethics for Counsellors. With confidentiality, there is a requirement and an ethical obligation for me to break confidentiality in 3 instances, and I'd like to go over those. First is money laundering, and that would be if you mentioned that you were involved in or even had any knowledge of money laundering, I would be obligated to break confidentiality. And I guess in those instances, and in all three of these instances, I wouldn't be required to check that with you first. And that maybe makes more sense when we cover the second one, which is an act of terrorism. If you were to indicate that you had knowledge of or were maybe involved in an act of terrorism, again, I would be obliged to break confidentiality. It may make a little more sense of why I wouldn't be maybe discussing that. The third is drugs running. That's not the taking of drugs. Drugs running, I wonder what your understanding is. You're 100% right. It's involved in the distribution chain at some point, import, export, and it seems that you have quite a clear understanding. Is that okay with you? Now, I monitor my own practice and I have regular supervision, and as still a student counsellor, for every 8 hours of face-to-face client contact I have 1.5 hours of supervision. So there may be elements of or aspects of this session that I might take into my supervisor. And I guess just to give you how I might do that, if I did take an element of this session into my supervisor, your name would not be mentioned. I don't mention my clients' names at supervision. I will mention the client brought, and again, it's about how I deal with the material. And I think maybe it's important to mention that the confidentiality that we've mentioned and the importance of that is shared by my supervisor. And what supervision is for is it's a safety net. If I was to miss something really important, I'm hoping that my supervisor would be another set of ears and eyes that might pick up on something. And if my supervisor missed that, well then my supervisor has a supervisor. And so that goes down a line, and hopefully somebody might pick that up somewhere along the line, and it's about best practice and giving you the best service. Is that okay? Regarding notes, I do keep confidential notes from my sessions. However, the notes I keep are kept in what is called a split note filing system. Now what that means is any notes that I make, first of all, are nondescript. Now what do I mean by nondescript? It's a big word. It's basically meaning that there's no distinguishing factors that would relate them back to you. Your name is not on there. It would be referred to the client. It would be very generic. And I can give you an example of that. Would that be helpful for you? An example might be I was working with the client. The client appeared to be very distressed as the client was crying. So it would be very generic. It wouldn't be directly relating back. There would be no distinguishing information on there that would link you to that. Yeah. And any kind of notes of who you were and your details would be kept separately. And I guess that would be important if my office was broken into, that you might feel secure that there is no information that might get out there. Now, so who would get access to those notes, I think, is also important. I have access to them, and I use that to review where we might be at in sessions. There are aspects from my notes, as I've spoken to you, that I may take to supervision, although I wouldn't take the physical notes, but maybe information from there. You could have access to those notes because it's your material. The notes can be accessed by subpoena from a court of law, by court order is what it's called, and they can be accessed by the coroner, but they would need a good reason to request that. And if there was ever a reason why somebody did request that, I would probably try to suggest to them that I did a summary of what might happen in our sessions as opposed to giving the notes up. That's a lot. And that's why I wanted to take the time to print it out for you, that you can take that away and have a look through it and see how that feels for you. It is a lot to take. And how are you feeling with all that? You're okay? Okay. And I guess now we have probably around 20 minutes, if that's okay, and that's your time to bring whatever you may feel comfortable to bring today.
just listening back to that now, I'm just really aware that it sounds like very one-sided dialogue with me speaking a lot. And it wasn't like that with the client there. I've purposely gone in, removed all of the client's noises of agreement when they said yes, all of that has been just taken out of respect for the confidentiality of that client. So here's the thing. If you want to get that recording, if you want to get the transcription of that recording so you can refer to that as well, and of course the extract from the assignment that was written to go along with that, you can get that from counsellingtutor.com. From the show notes page for today's episode, click on the podcast tab. It's episode number 4, and you can download that. Within the assignment, it's basically covering the opening of a session, working agreement. It's got what is on offer, health and safety, time boundaries, and of course ethics and confidentiality are all covered in there with a nice decent write-up that would go along. So it'll give you an idea when you're working on your own assignments. And I guess if there's any big message here, it is tell it as it is. If there's somebody sat there with a little pad and a pen marking your skill session, don't be shy to say to the person that you're doing the simulated session with, hey, here's how it is. There's somebody sat there with a pen who's writing this down. I see that, you see that. Don't pretend it's not there, but by pretending it's not there, or the person is not there, or the recording device is not there, you basically, that congruence is gone from the relationship. As a person-centered counselor, I look to Carl Rogers, who said that the core conditions, the conditions are necessary and sufficient to bring about an environment where a client can move from rigidity to fluidity. Congruence is necessary and it's sufficient. So if we kind of pretend, then congruence is no longer there. So how can there be a therapeutic relationship? But I'll leave that with you. Hopefully that will be of some use to somebody listening to this. But that's enough from me. That's a lot of rambling. So I guess it's time to hand back to you, Rory.
Just listening to you talk about tops and tails just makes me realise how important a good beginning and a good ending is in a therapy session, and indeed a lot of therapy sessions. And one of the biggest complaints that the BACP have to field is with counsellors who get complaints from clients who say they actually didn't know the therapy had ended.
Yeah.
So paying attention to beginnings and endings just so important. So we move on now to our segment of Ask Rory and Ken. And again, if you're in the Facebook feed, we've discussed it earlier, why don't you ask us a question? Ask Rory and Ken. If it's in our power, we will try and answer it for you, or give you our frame of reference of it. And today's Ask Rory and Ken is from Linda on the Facebook feed. So thank you, Linda. She said, I would like to know how I can show an understanding of how counsellor professional development makes for ethical practice. What a good question, Ken.
It is. It is an amazing question there. And I think very, very relevant. So I guess, how does professional development lead to ethical practice? So professional development is that we do after we have finished our studies. So we may finish our studies and go out into practice. So it's about us continuing to learn, develop our skills, and stay up to date with what is relevant, what is new, what is coming into counselling. I mean, as we speak right here in the UK, we are now sitting in February, and in June of this year, a brand new ethical framework is coming out from the BACP. So part of ethical practice would be checking that out, understanding what that is, what the new requirements are, and making sure that my practice meets that. So it's the training that you do, the continuing professional development that you do as a reflective practitioner.
Yeah, well, I agree. And I read the question a little differently, Ken. So it just goes to show about frames of reference, doesn't it? I read it that Linda was interested in maybe how you do that through training. And one of the things I would say, Linda, is sticking to the knitting, as I like to say in my in my training group. Many years ago, I was in a circle of trainees talking about who bring their case discussion. So for those of you who've never trained in counselling, it's not unusual for a case discussion to take place within a counselling training environment at practice level. And I was talking to this learner, and she was talking about, how this client was really struggling. And I said, well, how are you applying the theory? How are you applying person-centered theory? And she said, oh, no, she said, I'm not applying person-centered theory. I've bought a book on Jungian Hungarian psychotherapy.
Hungarian. There's a new word for everybody, Rory.
Psychotherapy.
Don't write this down, by the way, if you're listening to this. There is no Hungarian therapy.
Hungarian, it's Jungian. And Carl Jung. And I said, well, where did you get this book from? She said, I bought it for a book. Teach yourself Hungarian psychotherapy. And I said, what have you been doing? She said, I've been doing lots of kind of things around Jungian psychotherapy. And I said, do you think your client really is getting the best possible service from you when you're practicing a theory that takes 5 years to learn, at least 5 years to be a Jungian psychoanalyst, from a book that you bought from £3 from a bookstore? I said, to be ethical, and this really comes back to Linda's question, staying with the modality. If you're being taught
100%.
CBT or person-centered or whatever modality it is, stick with the knitting. Use that in your training practice. When you qualify, then, look for other areas of interest to build your practice. I mean, I will share with you that I spent a long time after practice trying to really understand person-centered therapy. And I know that, Ken, that's just an ongoing journey for you, isn't it?
Oh, for sure.
And before I looked at any other modality, because I'm a child and adolescent therapist, so I work with young people. We have to have a slightly different approach, but only slightly. And so I would say, understanding of a counsellor's professional development, stick with the knitting, Linda. Write on your essays, make sure that you fully understand the theory, and make sure that you when you're talking to your supervisor, you're talking to your peers, you're talking to your tutor, you're in the same language, and that really does show ethical practice.
Agreed. So I guess jumping back into my frame of reference, which read the same question rather differently, of how does CPD, continuing professional development, inform your ethical practice? And I'll give you an example. I was working with adolescents. I was working in a college, and I found that I had clients coming that were self-harming. It was then that I realized I needed to go and do some CPD. I needed to go and expand my knowledge in that area. It was, I guess, what you might call just-in-time learning. If I'm seeing something within a client and I feel that I could learn more about that, that's a good time to go and do some CPD, to go and get a deeper understanding of what that is. And it's about going to pure sources. Wikipedia is not a good source. Also, when you're doing your assignments, don't go to Wikipedia. Believe me, there's so much that is wrong on Wikipedia. Make sure that you're going to good sources. And it's about what is CPD? Well, reading the trade and industry magazines. So for us, that would, here in the UK, it's called Therapy Today from the BACP. There are others. I'm just mentioning that one as an example. That would be informing your practice as a practitioner. Listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast would inform your practice, because you're going to be picking up things and learning. So there's many ways. Speaking to a colleague about a topic where they may have done some training and have a deeper level of understanding. Rory, I know you and I have certainly had some deep conversations where I've taken plenty of notes and taken stuff that I've been able to use in practice, and I've felt that has been beneficial to my clients.
Absolutely. And I put down on my little CPD log 1 year Facebook, and that might sound quite trite and quite surface, but when I was a child and adolescent therapist, I did a lot of research before I went into practice, spoke with people who were practitioners in child and adolescent therapy. And one thing that came up was Facebook. Young people, their kind of separation between their virtual lives and their corporeal or real existing lives is very thin when it comes to modern media. And I did a lot of research on Facebook about how it works, how people engage with it. And Ken, my first client, when I went into working in the school, she sat down and she looked at me because I was completely ancient to her, and she said, "How much do you know about Facebook?" Wow. And it was all that information that I'd learned helped me understand her frame of reference when she was talking about, nudges and inboxing and timelines and this type of thing and statuses. I knew exactly what she was talking about, so it didn't clutter up the material that I was working with. So sometimes you've got to be a bit creative when you're looking at your CPD.
I love that. I really do. And that just shows that CPD can be outside of what we might consider the norm of counselling training. Facebook training is about as far away from counselling training as you can get, but it was there to aid your client. And that's the aim at the end of the day. How does it aim aid your client and make you a professional practitioner, a more well-rounded professional practitioner. I often hear people that have done a counselling course going, wow, well, maybe I can do some counselling online. Not without doing the training.
No.
Go and do the I was really surprised. It was an area that interested me, and I thought, hey, well, I'll go and do a postgrad certificate in online therapy. Whoa! Did I learn a lot. Stuff that was way beyond my reference. I would never have even thought of the stuff. Disinhibition of online communication was just one thing that just kind of blew me away. It was so much deeper than I thought. So learn about it. Make sure that you have all the knowledge that is available for you before you bring it into your practice. And as Rory said, what was it? Stick to the knitting. Stay true. Specifically when you are training, stay true to your base philosophy, the modality that you're learning within your college. If that's person-centered, stay person-centered. Find yourself a person-centered supervisor, at least for the time that you are in your college.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really true. I mean, you know, for a lot of training, 2 years, 3 years at practice level, it's not a lot if you think of all the holidays and the actual class contact time you've got. And it's taken me a heck of a long time. I still read person-centered therapy periodicals and magazines and books, and I go on forums, and I'm still saying to myself, I didn't know that. I didn't know that either.
Yeah.
Well, why didn't I know that? I should know this stuff. But that's the thing. It's, you know, the stuff and some of the newer ideas, like we talked about in dialogical theory, you know, that's a whole new idea in itself. So stick with the knitting and you can't go far wrong, is my view.
Agree. So hopefully that's going to give you some kind of answer there, Linda. Thank you very much for your question. Of course, we invite anybody listening to this, ask your questions. You've got something on your mind, come and ask Ken and Rory. You can do that in our Facebook group. And you find that just by going on Facebook and popping in Counselling Tutor. And we're going to be right there at the top. And it's a private group. You say, let me in, and we will let you in. And you can come and join the community. We have just under 1,000 people in that community at the moment. And that's growing by the day. So come and join like-minded individuals. And all we do is we hang out and we talk about what it is that we do, and that is, of course, studying, learning, counselling, and psychotherapy. Brings us to the end of today's episode. I hope that you found this useful. We invite you to come and have a look at the show notes. Show notes contain links to relevant information to what we've spoken about today. There's some downloads. Every now and again, we pop a video in there, and you can get our show notes by going to our mother website, which is counsellingtutor.com. Rory and I are based in the UK, so we spell counselling, COUNSELLING. It's got the 2 L's in there. Counsellingtutor.com. Click on the podcast tab, go to today's episode, which is episode number 4, and you will, of course, find the show notes from there.
Yep, and they're fantastic, full of detail, full of links, so you can really kind of engage in what the podcast is, and you can find out further information. So, yep, so that brings us to the end. So, as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.